My name is Avery Callahan. I was 17 years old when I learned that grief could be weaponized, and that the people most willing to exploit it sometimes share your last name. My mother, Diane, passed away on an ordinary Tuesday in October. The sun had the nerve to shine that day, bright and indifferent, while I sat beside her hospital bed and held a hand so fragile it felt like holding paper. She was 43, a fourth-grade teacher who spent 16 years buying winter coats for children whose parents couldn't afford them, and staying late to cut construction paper into shapes nobody asked her to make. Cancer took her in 23 months. She taught through chemotherapy, graded papers with an 4 in her arm, and never once complained in front of me. In her final days, barely able to speak, she pulled me close and whispered a name, Eleanor Whitfield. She made me promise to call her. I didn't understand why. I just held her hand and said yes. My father, Thomas, had not visited her once during those 2 years of illness. He sent a text after she died that read, "Sorry for your loss," as though she were a distant acquaintance and not the woman who had raised his daughter alone. Since Virginia required a legal guardian for a minor, and since my Aunt Sandra's application was denied, I packed 2 suitcases and moved into a house I had never visited, Thomas's home in Clover Ridge, where his wife Renee and her 2 children already occupied every bedroom. I was given a converted storage room with a camp cot and a bare bulb overhead. 2 days after my arrival, I overheard Renee in the kitchen asking how long until the trust thing got sorted. I pulled my mother's blanket around my shoulders and memorized the words. People reveal themselves early. The smart move is to believe them. The pressure escalated quickly. At dinner one weekend, Renee walked through a list of financial burdens: her daughter's tuition, a leaking roof, credit card debt, while directing her gaze entirely at Thomas. He turned to me with a rehearsed casualness and mentioned that my mother had left me some money and that we should discuss it as a family. When I said the funds were held in a trust one couldn't access, Renee leaned forward. Trusts can be changed. We looked it up. That single word, we, told me everything. This was not a dinner conversation. It was a coordinated strategy they had planned long before I moved in. I excused myself, went to my room, and opened the small wooden box I had carried from my mother's house. Inside, her reading glasses, a birthday card, and a folded paper with a phone number. The name beside it, in her handwriting, was Eleanor Whitfield, Esquire. I drove to that office on a Saturday with Aunt Sandra. Eleanor Whitfield was silver-haired, precise, and looked at me the way someone looks at a person they have long been expecting. She explained that my mother had established an irrevocable trust 18 months before her death, naming Whitfield as sole trustee and me as the only beneficiary. $400,000, drawn from life insurance, personal savings, and the sale of our family home. My mother had quietly sold that house 6 months before she died. I had assumed it was to cover medical bills. In truth, she was constructing a barrier that no petition, no guardianship claim, and no family pressure campaign could dismantle. Whitfield also handed me a sealed envelope in cream-colored paper. My mother's handwriting on the front read, "For Thomas, when the time comes." She told me I would know when that moment arrived. The breaking point arrived on a Monday morning when I found a letter in Renee's kitchen junk drawer. It was from the trust bank, addressed originally to Whitfield's office, with a copy forwarded to the household as standard procedure. The letter confirmed that a woman identifying herself as Renee Callahan, legal guardian of Avery Callahan, had contacted the bank requesting account details and withdrawal instructions. The request had been denied. Renee had impersonated my legal guardian to access money my dying mother had spent her final year protecting. I photographed both sides of the document, replaced it exactly where I found it, and emailed the photos to Whitfield with a single sentence. Her response came within the hour. "This was precisely what your mother anticipated." She had written legal instructions for this scenario before she ever drew her last breath. The formal meeting took place on a Tuesday morning. Whitfield's conference room was modest. Oak table, for chairs, a water pitcher nobody touched. Renee arrived with a folder thick with papers printed from the internet and the confident posture of someone who believed they were walking into a negotiation. Thomas arrived sweating and kept touching his collar. Whitfield read from the trust documents with the unhurried calm of someone who has nothing to prove. She explained the irrevocable structure, the trustee arrangement, the distribution schedule. Renee interrupted to insist that Thomas held parental rights. Whitfield was patient. Parental rights do not extend to an irrevocable trust established by a third party. Then she produced the bank letter and read Renee's name aloud in connection with the unauthorized inquiry. The folder on Renee's lap, full of downloaded legal arguments, suddenly looked like a prop from a play that had already closed. Then came the envelope. Whitfield read my mother's letter aloud. It did not shout. It did not accuse with bitterness. It simply told the truth with the steady clarity of a woman who had chosen her words carefully and had all the time in the world to choose them. She wrote that she had always known Thomas, that he was not a cruel man but a weak one, and that weakness causes the same damage as cruelty when left unchecked. She wrote that she knew he would remarry, and that whoever he chose would look at what she had built and see an opening. She wrote that she could not make him into the father their daughter deserved, but she could ensure that their daughter would be safe without one. Thomas put his face in his hands and cried. Renee stood, grabbed her folder, and walked out. I turned 18 7 months later. The day I left, I loaded the same 2 suitcases I had arrived with. My father stood in the doorway holding a coffee cup, looking older than 45. He said, "Good luck." I said goodbye and got into Aunt Sandra's car. I did not slam the door. I closed it quietly the way she taught me. My dorm room at the university was 8 by 12 feet. It was the most beautiful space I had ever inhabited. I hung my mother's photograph above my desk and put on her bracelet every morning. I studied. I wrote. I grew. My mother did not teach me to fight loudly. She taught me something more durable, how to prepare. She sat at her sister's kitchen table with a legal pad and built a structure that would outlast her, one that no amount of pressure, manipulation, or family theater could compromise. She could not be present to protect me, so she put it in writing, and that was enough.